Hey guys, welcome back to History Revision Success. So today I'm filming a video for you on the causes of the War of Independence, the causes of the American break from the British Empire. So this will be most useful for migration course and Power and the People course. You both cover the same topic here, and any other courses or GCSE A level where you need to know in detail the causes of what happened to inspire this War of Independence. So I've mentioned this many a time, so I'll do it very, very quickly. But if you don't already follow me on Instagram, please do go ahead and follow me. There's loads of helpful tips on there that will help you succeed in your GCSE and A level. Now, getting started. So sorry, here we go. Long term first. So I think it's it's easier in your brain to consider these causes into kind of three categories: long term, short term, trigger. What are the long term causes that turned those 13 colonies on the eastern coast of America from the Atlantic to the Mississippi, that turned them away from Britain and turned them over time to want to be independent? So first category, I'm going to look at the idea of independent minds. So by the 1760s, people who lived in America were tough and independent. Many had descended from the Puritans and the Quakers who had escaped religious persecution in England. They had traveled all the way to America to escape persecution. They were not going to stand by and let it happen all over again in their new homeland, kind of full of freedom and new ideas. Now, because there was very little British intervention, the colonists don't really feel British anymore. We're kind of 2-3 generations later, and they are starting to develop this idea of a new American identity. They also have an economy that doesn't rely on British trade. In addition, they are, as you can understand, as you can imagine, 3,000 miles away. It's not quite the same as, England and Wales. They're across the Atlantic Ocean. There was very little chance any of them were ever going to go back to England. And so that's kind of the first main cause. Now, the second one is the idea of independent actions. So the British system of aristocracy and monarchy was seen as outdated by this point, particularly in America. Those who had succeeded in America were businessmen, were capitalists, were entrepreneurs, had gone out there with very, very little and set up their own businesses. In this case, most likely to be plantations. So of course, morally not okay, but they had been successful on their own. They were self-made people. They didn't rely on the social hierarchy or the aristocracy in the same way that kind of in Britain people still did. Now, this had kind of entrenched a belief in equality in the colonies, and colonies such as New Plymouth, for example, had even set up their own constitutions, which clashed with British rule. Now, a third long-term cause would be disputes over trade. And in particular, I'm going to refer here to the Navigation Acts. So from 1651 to 1673, there were a series of navigation acts, all intended to enrich Britain. A series of laws which stated colonists could only buy and export goods with British ships sailing to and from British ports. This would give Britain a complete monopoly on trade. They would be able to dictate everything, what was being shipped, how much was being shipped, what the prices were, and this allowed them to keep the prices high. Now, following on from that, we also have disputes over taxation. So goods had to be taxed in Britain before they could go to America, and there was very high taxes placed on things like glass, coffee, wine, and sugar. In 1765, we had the Stamp Act. This was an official tax on official paper. So any paper you needed for your wedding certificate or for your house permit, any of those official documents, you had to pay a premium simply for the tax on the paper it was printed on. They also had to pay for wars against the French. So the colonists were funding Britain's war against the French. So first of all, that feels very irrelevant to them. They don't feel like they need to be involved in this. It's so far away, who cares? And secondly, America and France had kind of a developing relationship. The French obviously aided the Americans in the War of Independence. The French then had their own revolution. So we have kind of an animosity about this. The Americans didn't want to be funding this war. They also had this very famous phrase, they had a feeling that if they were being taxed this heavily, they should at least be allowed representation in Parliament. No taxation without representation. A key phrase you really, really, really need to remember. Now, we're moving on to the short-term causes. So the first one would be the Boston Massacre in 1770. So this is what I would say is kind of a spark for these short-term events, this short-term problem. The spark was that colonists threw snowballs, ice, and stones at the British soldiers. And by doing that, the soldiers opened fire and killed 3 of the colonists. So this was seen as a very unfair, kind of unequal scenario. British soldiers opening fire on civilians, and 3 people died. Now, following on from that, we had the Boston Tea Party. This was a crisis after the Tea Act, and that had stated that it was 3 pence tax for every pound of tea. A group of American colonists boarded ships in Boston port in December 1773, and they dumped 342 crates of tea worth £11,000 into the harbour. Remember, that's at that time, that's not with inflation. So while today, £11,000 is a lot of money, but it might not seem like a substantial amount of money. However, at the time it was. Now, as a reaction to this, the British immediately closed the port and said, we're not going to reopen it until you pay the money back. They also passed the Intolerable Acts, which were a series of acts which allowed or should have allowed Britain to tighten their control of America. One of the things that happened in the Intolerable Acts was that all town meetings were banned. That meant that the colonists couldn't meet up and discuss things or discuss their approach or what they were going to do about Britain. In 1774, however, they defied this law, and 56 representatives from all the colonies met in a secret First Congress, and they decided at this Congress they were going to fight the British. This takes us to the last event, what I would probably call the trigger cause of the war, which was the Lexington incident. And by 1775, the anti-British feeling was extremely strong in America. So this all happened because the British tried to seize a supply of gunpowder in Concord. When they tried to do this, 20,000 Minutemen, which were local farmers, clerks, ploughboys, ordinary people, civilians essentially, who were just tired, they were exhausted, they were fed up, and they were done with British rule. So they reacted and fired back on the soldiers. Now, this is the Lexington incident, and this is what I would call the spark of the revolution. It started the war. It's kind of technically the very first conflict that happens, the first moment where the 2 sides come up against each other. So that's the causes. Hopefully that's made it clearer for you. I'm going to do one more video. I did say I was done, but I'm going to do one more on the war itself and look at the events and look at the significance of it, and what you can write about in your essay question if you get that significance question within the AQA thematic topic for both Power and the People or for migration. So stay tuned for that, and do please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue doing this and putting this content out there for you.